Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
we're just going to start at the beginning. When was the first time that you composed music?
So when I was really young, I started playing guitar. My dad and I took guitar lessons together. And I think that part of the process of sort of learning to play an instrument is to just like mess around. So my earliest composing memories are probably just messing around on guitar and things like that and trying to try new things or combine songs that I knew and stuff like that. So I think that was the first time where I started really getting into composition. Later, as a teenager and stuff like that, I got more into songwriting with bandmates and just by myself and things like that. I got really into sort of technology. Uh, it was the early days of MIDI. So I was kind of into, how do computers work with MIDI and how can I make my own music and sequencers and things like that. So as I became sort of 16, 17, 18, uh, I was really kind of into, how do I make music with these machines? And, uh, at the time there was this, it was called Professional Composer, where I could notate things too, and my notation was terrible when I first started out. And as I sort of got better, my notation got better. But it's also, I think, partly I was acquainted with computers, and so composing on the computer was always kind of easy for me, which then led, to sort of modern day transition where everyone basically composes on some sort of computer. Not everyone, but most people. So I was really well set up on the tech side for my career uh, and writing music.
That must have been really nice for you to have kind of a head start with that.
Yeah, I was a really sciencey kid. I
Oh,
went to like
nice.
science camp. I went to like computer camp. I was a real tech person, like right out of the gate. And so when I combined that sort of with my musical skills, it just seemed like a perfect match to me.
Yeah, that's really cute that your dad and you took guitar lessons together. Was that done intentionally or?
I think so. I was, pretty young. My dad was also left-handed, and I was right-handed. But
Hmm.
I think for a new person playing an instrument for the first time, they were like, "Oh, just play right-handed. It will be the same, or since you're learning it for the first time." Anyways, yeah, I actually still have my dad's guitar that
Aw.
he didn't stick with it, but I did, and it was a great way for us to kind of bond a little bit when
Hmm.
when I was young.
Was your family pretty musical, or was that kind of the first and only part of music that they got into?
So yes and no. I was adopted, and so I'm talking about my sort of the father that raised me, got me into music a little bit, and I was always kind of musically inclined. And my sister played flute, and uh, my mom played clarinet when she was young. Not super musically inclined, super super sciency. Like my sister's a veterinarian, my dad is an ophthalmologist, so that was kind of the sciency tech part. And then, but I've met my birth family, including my birth mother and my brothers, and they're all super musical. My
Mm.
birth mother plays guitar. They all sing. They're all involved with church bands and choirs. And my one of my half brothers is also works for a music company, like a music
Oh, wow.
merchandising company. So
That's kind of nice that you got both sides of it then, the science and the music
yeah,
naturally.
totally,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's so cool. So, at what point did you decide to pursue composing professionally? Like, did you go to school or did you end up trying to pursue something else and eventually get into music?
So, um, like most of my summers were filled with some sort of camp that I would go to, and one of the camps that I went to was the 5-week program at Berklee College of Music, which is kind of set up for high school students. And that's when I decided I wanted to go into music professionally. I didn't think composing came a little bit later. Uh, so after that 5-week program, I came back to Berkeley and went to college there. and I dual majored in actually I dual majored in MP&E and film scoring, but then it got too much and I dropped film scoring, and then I, did music production and engineering. And then I would also get the chair's permission to like take some synthesis classes and some
Mm,
other. So a lot of different variety of different things when I was at Berkeley. And when I left Berkeley, I thought, oh, I wanted to be um, a professional recording engineer. That's what I really loved. I really loved recording orchestras and recording live bands and in the studio. I really love that. My first gig when I left Berkeley, though, was for a music production company. Uh, I kind of had a couple different paths to go in. I got offered several different jobs when I left Berkeley, and I decided eventually to go with a music production company, and they were doing a mix of music for television commercials, radio commercials, film, television, records like albums for bands
mm,
and things like that. And I was working there primarily as a assistant composer or almost assistant engineer a lot of the times, helping out all the staff composers and staff writers at the time. And a video game came in the door and no one wanted to work on it. Everyone was like, no, I don't have enough time to work on that. It's going to take a long time. And I, it combined so much of my skills in terms of technical expertise and composition and the fact that I could do sound design and I could do all this other stuff, that it was a good match for me. So my first game was back in 1992, and so I've been doing it, 30 plus years now. Primarily games and interactive stuff. So it could be like like early beginnings of interactive television or edutainment, CD-ROMs, all this stuff along the way. But that was the first opportunity where I was being paid to actually write music and do sound design, um, record dialogue, put it all together into a game. And that's when I sort of realized my dreams of becoming a recording engineer, were starting to I was starting to shift directions a little bit. Also, being a recording engineer was a really lousy way to make money,
mm,
with companies that were not willing to pay you on time. And so composition turned out to be a much more lucrative way for me to kind of advance my career and have a living. Um, and I've always kind of been a jack of all trades a little bit, which so I don't have uh, necessarily a specialty. A lot of people like specialize in one thing, like they're just great orchestrators or just
mm,
great composers. I am I write music, I do sound design, I implement, I can record dialogue, I can, record lots of it. So I have a broad skill set, which makes me appropriate for certain types of jobs as opposed to having a real specialty in one thing. It allows me to take a lot of different jobs, which is also really great in terms of I don't really have to worry about work so much. But it makes me different than, say, someone who just specializes in writing music for a television show
mhm.
or something like that.
Yeah. So, what were you using on your first video game in terms of the technology to do all of the music and sound and stuff?
So that's a great question. This was 1991, 92. I was working for a music production company in New York City, and they had three studios at the time, and they had kind of a day shift and a night shift. And each studio had a giant console, a very expensive console, and they all had each room had a synclavier, which is kind of like a modern day DAW. Like it was kind of like all the tools that you needed to create music, including recording and uh, a keyboard, an attached keyboard that you would write music with. And that was my sort of I guess second experience, because I was already familiar with at the time with using the Macintosh computer to write music. And so I was able to adapt to Synclavier pretty well, and it was an amazing tool at the time. It still is kind of an amazing, quirky tool, and actually one of the most musical tools I've ever worked with in terms of the interface. In terms, it always felt really musical. You were always at your keyboard. You're spending less time looking at your screen, more
Hmm.
writing. So at the time, yeah, I was using Synclaviers to write. We were using tape, like reel to reel tape recorders. We
Hmm.
had three 24 tracks at that studio. So a lot of it went onto these 2-inch tape recorders when we were kind of fine. And that involved a lot of other tech, like, SMPTE code and synchronizing tape machines with these fancy music making computers and things like that. But that's the kind of tech we were using. Everything was really expensive, so the barrier to entry was really high, and only companies at a certain level could kind of lay out that kind of money
Hmm.
to make all that stuff happen. That has clearly changed over the past 30 years, so that what we did on those machines you could do with a MacBook Pro and you know a, a,
Yeah,
an audio interface. So it's really changed and leveled the playing field in terms of allowing people from really diverse backgrounds to get into music and write music, and so that's been exciting, an exciting change to kind of watch over the decades.
that's very cool. So, after you did that video game, did you quit your job at the studio, or how did you continue to pursue composing more?
Also a great question. I continued at that company for a total of 6 years. And then at the end of the sort of 6 year point, I went out on my own and started my own company, of which I've owned several companies that did music and sound design, primarily for games and interactive entertainment. Uh, so, and it was a variety of different projects. It also, because we were in New York City, the types of games that we were doing in New York City was very different than, say, people working in Seattle or Los Angeles or in Tokyo or in other places around the world. The kinds of games that I was doing were primarily kids' games,
Hmm.
and when you start on your career, you don't quite realize how influential the first couple gigs that you get will influence the next job that you get. Like, if you do a really great job on a kids game, obviously more people are going to come to you to do kids music and things like that. And it's not initially what I set out to do, but a lot of success in the music business is based on kind of your community and where you fit in, and can you develop ties into a community to kind of support yourself and support a living. And I found that community to be primarily in games, even though I love film and I love record making and I love all these other things. My people, in quotes, my people are in games. They're game developers, they're coders, they're art art directors. They are uh, kind of people that are really into games are tend to be quiet and a little bit introverted and not social beings at all. Where people in film, it's a much more social kind of thing. I fit much better into that community than, say, finding work in, say, film and television and things
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah. How would you recommend people starting out in their composing career to find their people?
Um, this this is a really another great question that I get asked a lot in terms of young people pursuing music as a career. And I think sometimes that people, when they're coming out of college or high school and they want to get into music, what they see on a surface level are all the people that are really famous for doing it. So you might look at, say, Hans Zimmer, or you might look at, in games, you might look at Yoko Shimomura, for instance. Uh, Two famous composers in totally different realms. But day to day, making a living as a music maker is a little bit different. So if you try and for instance, go after the next Kingdom Hearts. Yoko Shimomura composed the Kingdom Hearts series. Did a really fantastic job. If you try and get that gig, well, they already have a composer for that gig. So it's like, where do I fit in? How do I fit into this thing? So I think trying to develop in a bunch of different communities to try and figure out where, again, in quotes, your people are, uh, it's important to recognize the thing that you love may be different than where you're needed or where you can best provide your musical services to someone. So if you try and put a real sort of narrow focus on one specific area, it's going to be harder to get work initially than trying to put like a broad spectrum on, oh, it's music and it's a check at the end of the day. Yes, I can do that.
Hmm.
And then let the money sort of lead to the next job and the next, thing. You you do sort of direct it too, like, oh, I'm gonna put my focus here first, or I'm gonna put. But I never realized growing up, I was a film nut. I loved film. I watched like every David Lynch film. I was like every Hitchcock film. I was super into film as a teenager, but in terms of finding work in film for me, it didn't work out that way. In terms of my community is not in film, so I can't find work there in the way that I can find work in games. So
Hmm.
what you love necessarily doesn't translate into the medium. And talking about the medium, whether it's film or television or advertising or commercial communications or UI sounds or car engine sounds or all these different places that you can make money as a composer, it's important to recognize that if you go after the biggest film or the biggest game, there's not a lot of work for you. It's easier to kind of work on jobs that are not as prestigious and kind of work your way up to those larger jobs, because it's really hard to jump in to the deep end of the pool, so to speak, because you lack experience, you lack, and it may not be the music writing. You may be a terrific music writer, but it's in communicating at that high level with a high profile director or a high profile game developer and things like that. That's where the community aspect is going to sort of help you or hurt you.
Hmm. I think I want to ask next, when you receive a project to work on, what does your creative process look like? And is it different depending on what you're doing? If so, if you're working on a game, is it different from working on, I don't know, something else that you might compose for, but if that makes sense.
I think the first thing that I do as a composer is try and develop, especially if it's a new client I haven't worked with before, it's important to establish the musical language between you and the creative. And sometimes that's easy, but sometimes that can be really difficult. I find that generally what we'll do is establish a creative direction before I start writing note one. So, for example, uh, we might put together a musical style guide where we talk about different types of musical directions so that we're on the same page musically as best we can before I start writing. I don't necessarily like jobs that the director says, "Oh, do whatever you want." That is terrifying to me, because in their mind they have a vision of what the music should sound like,
Hmm.
and you need to interpret that for whatever product or venue you're. And if you don't have a musical language where you can speak to that director, then things fall apart rather quickly. So establishing things like, oh, when you mean electronica, do you mean sort of uh, dubstep, or do you mean Madonna, or whatever it is? Like trying to
Hmm.
figure out that musical language before you dive in too deep. There are many jobs where the communication actually does break down. I was working on this job one time where they wanted sort of classic jazz, like bebop jazz. And so we put saxophone on it, and the creative came back and said, "Oh no, I hate saxophone."
Oh.
And so I was like, "What? You love classic jazz, but but Coltrane not a thing?"
Yeah.
It was really so. That's when things start to break down, when their vision doesn't match your vision, and you try and So having that language as much as you can, defining out not only the style and genre, but how big the ensemble is. Is it a 100-piece orchestra, or is it a quartet? Is it intimate? Is it abstract? Is it super melodic? Is it more textural? Getting that language in place before I start writing is going to save me a lot of time. It's going to save them a lot of time. So that's the important piece, is getting on the same page
Mhm.
musically and creatively.
Once you're on that page, what do you like to do next to start actually composing the music?
For me, my process is a little strange. I think everyone's a little different. I am never sure about my first direction. So I'll start writing, and then I'll sort of get bored of the current direction that I'm on. And then I'll start writing a completely new direction. And then based on the musical framework that we set out. But I'm typically working on three or four pieces for that first present. And so I'll jump around a lot because I'm not sure. Having some distance between your pieces is also important. What I mean by that is, um, you only get to hear a piece first the very first time you hear it.
Mhm.
So if you spend a lot of time on a specific piece, it's hard to evaluate it. I really admire people that all along the process they can like reevaluate where they're currently at and make steps. But a lot of times I'm like, oh, is that right? And I'm questioning myself. If I go between one direction, another direction, then when I go back to the first direction, I have a renewed sense of what I need to do to make it better. So because it's almost like, oh, I get to listen fresh again. And if I stick with one piece for 8 hours or more, it's really hard for me to step back, have some perspective about, is it going in the right direction or not. And this is my cure for it. It's like, all right, well, I'm just going to write four pieces. When I get kind of sick of the first one, I'll go to the second one, and then I'll revisit the first one, and I'll bounce around so that I can have this sort of fresh perspective when I'm listening to a piece. There's a really great quote that I kind of live by. It's a Tom Waits quote. Tom Waits is a kind of a really interesting artist, in my opinion, who's written musicals and really kind of cool, interesting albums. I feel like Tom Waits and David Lynch are similar in terms of they can take you to these you know, really mysterious and dark sometimes places as storytellers. They're incredible storytellers. And he was talking about hearing music from down the hall and in another room. And it's that one point where you don't recognize that it's yours, that you can have a fresh
Mm.
perspective on what it sounds like. If you're sitting in front of your speakers and your musical setup all the time, it's hard to get that fresh perspective. So I really like this kind of idea of being able to bounce around a little bit so I can try and have a little bit more sense of what the next step might need to take to make the piece better. So that's just my way of working.
Mhm. It's really interesting that you say that because today, for some reason, I was thinking a lot about how it's not like this in the world we live in. It's very fast paced, especially when you are working as a composer because you need to have the music done by a certain time. But how nice it would be to just take like a month after you wrote something to come back to it because of that fresh perspective. Because sometimes, I don't know, sometimes when I watch old projects that I've composed for, I'm just like, I don't think that was quite the right cue or like quite the right feeling there. Or maybe I could have had more silence in this part. And it would be nice if our world wasn't so fast paced so we could have that time to go back and have a new perspective on it.
Yeah, there are a couple ideas that I can relate to that, and it relates to kind of the jobs that you pick too. One of the Because I worked at this commercial music house, ideas for commercials, because you have 30 seconds to kind of tell a story. We were all writing at kind of a really fast pace, and um, I find that I enjoy the collaborative process over a long period of time much better than I enjoy the short form. Oh, I'm creating 3 commercials in a day, or I'm, knocking out these ideas really quickly, because you can iterate with the team that you're collaborating with. So I think that some people work better in short form than they do in long form,
Mm,
or vice versa. And again, it's kind of like, in addition to finding your people, it's like, what form do you like better? Do you like iterating over 2 years? A lot of the games that I work on, we have a 2 year time cycle where I'm usually working on it for 2 years before it actually gets released. That's a long time to iterate, change, and add new features and things like that. Where
mhm,
a commercial, if I'm doing a Nike commercial or some other type of thing, we'll have to get an idea together in less than a day, ship it to the client, and it's a lot more like, there's not an iterative process. The ad agency might put it out to a bunch of music houses, and it's kind of like a shotgun approach. Everyone is doing a different direction, and you're crossing your fingers that it's going to work. Whereas opposed to a film or a game, you have a much longer cycle to kind of iterate and make it right and get it really great. Primarily because there's a lot more music
mm,
in long form than there is for short form.
mhm, that makes sense. Do you have a company right now that you're working with or that you own?
So I've had 2 companies that I've owned in the past. Currently, I'm more of a contractor. So I have a company set up that basically I can do all my billing through, and I can do my taxes and all that kind of stuff through that company. But I'm not actively selling my company to individuals. I'm selling my services to uh, sound houses or people, like, my primarily contract work is either with the game developer itself, or through a company that is doing game, that has the relationship with the game developer. So I used to have employees. It's difficult to run a company and grow it, and you have to be constantly concerned about paying your employees, and is there enough work coming in, and are my employees happy, and what benefits can we, insurance and health benefits or whatever. Uh, Running a company is a different thing than just, and now I'm just a creative. It's like
Mm,
and typically a pretty well-rounded creative. On Monday I'm doing music, on Tuesday I'm doing sound design, on Thursday I'm doing some implementation. uh so my every week is uh a little of this, a little of that, a little. So I'm that's just the way that I enjoy kind of my work, and I enjoy not owning a company right now in my life. It can be a
mhm,
really big headache, but for some people it's really great. And being an employee of a company also has its perks and benefits too. Although in a lot of situations, composers, there's like the lead composer who owns the company, who's kind of the face of the company and responsible for getting the work and pulling in the work. And then there's probably several or many junior level composers that are actually facilitating the day to day, oh, music work of trying to get cues written and out to the network or the film production company. So, but the name on the responsibility of, say, a junior composer is very different. They're focused only on, oh, they only have to write. They don't have to go out and interact with the client, or maybe the client interaction is much smaller. They're prepping
mhm,
for orchestral sessions. They're kind of doing all this other work, where the person on the door, whose name is on the door, is that's the contact. And going from one to the other is a whole different role. The ability to do sales, the ability to kind of market your company. I don't have to do a lot of that as just a contractor. I can work for several people who know me and think I'm reliable and keep hiring me. So I don't have to make as many calls. I don't have to kind of develop those relationships and go to those parties and go to those networking events and things like that. So for me right now, where I'm at in my life, I enjoy being a contractor. Also means that I don't have to like keep my website up to date. It means that I don't have to do all the extra things to kind of get work that I
Hmm.
would have to do if my name was on the door.
Right. Hey composers, I'm interrupting this episode to let you know about the newsletter being sent out in accordance with this podcast. You'll receive it every other Wednesday in your inbox, covering topics like creativity tips, updates for new episodes, music industry recaps, and other musical tidbits to keep you thinking outside the box. You can sign up at www.nadiamare.com/podcast or click the link in the episode description below that says sign up for newsletter. Looking forward to having you join our growing community of composers who will have something to look forward to in their emails. Now, back to the episode. Do you have a preference between composing versus sound design versus implementation?
This has changed over the years. I think music always was my sort of first love, and it's the thing that I really enjoy doing. But quite honestly, as I get older, the number of musical directions is is vast, and creative interpretation on the part of a client is also kind of this game that we play to get to a point where the vision of the product is reached, right? If we're doing music for a superhero game, we want everything to match, and we want to match whatever the game developer's original vision is for the product and things like that. And music creatively is incredibly subjective. So I find that as I move through my career, I enjoy music less now than the more paperwork item of like doing sound design. It's almost like the difference between writing a novel and doing your taxes. Like writing a novel, that's the music part, right? Doing
Mhm.
my taxes, that's like checking off items and like, oh, does this sound right here? There's a lot less creative interpretation. I don't want to say my ego is fragile, but everyone's ego is fragile to some extent. And when you get bad feedback on a piece of music, I like less of that in my now that I've been around longer. And so sound design for me, it's like, oh yeah, I don't have to worry as much about the
Right.
creative interpretation or the subjectivity of it. Where music, you're always being scrutinized for what's in the music. So I find the anxiety level for writing music is much higher than say the days that I'm implementing a sound or the days that I'm doing sound design and things like that.
Mhm. What was your favorite project that you've ever worked on, if you could pick one?
There's kind of multiple different layers in this. I would say my favorite projects are the ones where I'm collaborating with a team that I really like and they respect me and I love the team and it's a really great working relationship and it feels really collaborative. You know, I might suggest a game idea and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. Let us try that out." Those are my favorite projects to work on, and they are not necessarily the most successful
Mm.
in terms of the money at the end of the day, or even in terms of the marketplace. It was more I had a great time working with this team. I really want to work with this team again. So in terms of favorite projects, it's more about what like to have a great time working on it as opposed to a high stress project, which might get lots of iterations and lots of feedback where it's like, oh yeah, it's very prestigious at the end of the day. It's very famous. Like everyone's heard this, right? Um, but it was very stressful to kind of put that together. And the team was not communicative or the team was not fun to work with or so for me, it's always about the team dynamics and less about the final product. Sometimes they coincide and they're both like, oh, not only was the team great, but the game at the end of the day was also super fun to play and really great. But I find that that's not always the case. In some games you work on, and then they get canceled,
Mm,
or they sometimes they get launched and then canceled. And I don't care so much about that, because it for me it's more about the day to day. I come to my desk, I'm I come to my keyboard, I'm writing music, I'm having a good time. It's a little bit less about the ultimate success of a product or a show.
mhm,
It's more about, oh, I had a great time working with that team. And that typically means, oh, I'm going to work with them on the next project too. So
mm,
those outcomes really are the way I kind of judge the projects that I work on.
yeah. Do you have a specific game that you really enjoyed working on?
Uh, this gets really interesting too, because a lot of games I can't talk about because my name wasn't on the door at the end. I enjoyed my first project that I think was super collaborative and was super fun to work on was Diner Dash. This goes back a couple decades, probably in the 2000s, and it was super fun to work with the team, and we were iterating on it. We were iterating on a game called Lunch. That's what it was called. And then the publisher was like, "No, we can't name a game called Lunch. We can't put that out." And so we renamed it Diner Dash. But that was when all the team dynamics were working, just like firing on all cylinders, and it was super fun to work with. And I would make
Is
suggestions,
that
and so
is that like a phone game where you have to, like,
it did
send the
turn
server
into a
out and stuff?
yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah. It was
because
it
I
was
played that.
yeah. It's like you're you're a waitress and you have to
Yeah.
seat people. You're kind of the hostess, and you're seating people, and
Mhm.
then you kind of level up, and your restaurant gets bigger. I think the character's name was Flo,
Yes, I
and
definitely
and
played
then
that.
Flow would it was one of the first time management games to exist, where you had to manage time. That's how you
Mm,
play the game. It's like, oh, you have to put the order in, then wait for the food to be up. Then while you're waiting for the food to be up, you have to seat the next table, and then you go up. And but there are lots of games like that now.
mhm,
But that was the first one. It was like the team, like I would go and work at the game developer's studio, right, which at the time was in Chinatown in New York. And it was just super fun to like iterate with them, put new sounds in, hear it, get feedback right away, you know
hmm,
so that's a project that I have a lot of fond memories for. We did a lot of that similar team. We did a lot of projects for Lego, which we really enjoyed. Um, and so I also worked a lot, again, in the kids genre, lots of kids games in that period of my life, where I was working with Sesame Street and Nickelodeon and lots of other kind of kids projects, which were fun. Now most of the projects that I work on are superhero games, right? I've worked on 3 superhero games over the last 5 years. One is soft launching now, which is kind of exciting. One got canceled. um, I've done sort of epic things too. Games like Civilization, uh, and things like that, where I'm doing sort of period music, or I'm doing fun, playful games for headsets. I can't say that I like the headset games, meaning AR and VR games, only because
mhm.
putting on the Meta Quest 3 and taking it off like 10 times a day is not fun, especially for a
Oh,
person that
yeah.
has glasses. And you're at the end of the day, your hair is like all over it's just like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, like I feel like I just woke up or so. So yeah, I've tended to work on lots of projects that also can be experimental at the time that we're doing them. One of the very first uh, network games I did was back in 1995. It actually launched with Windows 95. It was a game called Netwits, and it was super cutting edge. It was a real time. You can think of it as words with friends. It's kind of like that, except back in 1995, with limited internet and kind of all the challenges. But that was a really awesome team that I worked with that on that. And I think some of the clients that you gain through these experiences can last kind of a lifetime too, in terms of thinking about sales and networking. Uh, the the game designer for that original game, back in 94, 95, when we were sort of building it, uh, we were still working 20, 30 years later. So it's important to recognize that contacts, if you do great work for them, they will keep coming back over and over and
Mhm.
over again for other projects. That game was an internet game that was was really fun and kind of like a puzzle game. But that same game designer, her name's Tracy Fullerton, did a game all about Walden Pond, many years later, and we collaborated on that. And that happened to be kind of exciting because I also lived at the time close to Walden Pond, so I could collect all the sounds and write the music uh, as related to Thoreau's time at Walden Pond. So it was a great, there was a great team. There was lots of mutual respect between the game designers and myself, and we just had a really great time working on it. And it was a totally different kind of project.
Hmm. I think you were working on that when you were my professor or had just done it or something because I remember you showing us samples of it in class.
Yeah, it went through a bunch of iterations. Then actually, it it had a new life during COVID too, because during COVID, we split up the game into these little modules where high schools would be able to use it in their curriculum to talk about
Oh.
different topics, whether it was how the environment's changed, or talk about the Underground Railroad that he was a part of. And so it had different aspects of where we could split it out. And so we actually converted it. Originally, it was for, you know, PlayStation and Xbox, but we were able to make it run on Chromebooks. So we reiterated things and kind of made everything smaller so that we could run it for high school students at that time. And we got some nice funding from the National Endowment of the Humanities, the National Endowment of the Arts, to kind of put that into schools. And it was a lot of fun to work on. So I probably worked on that project for over a decade in various
Wow.
forms and iterations.
That's very cool. It sounds like composing for games is very collaborative just in terms of working with a lot of people who are involved in the project, which sounds kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. The teams are bigger. Well, not like if you took the entire um, film or television team, that's a lot of people. With a game, on a day-to-day basis, on games I'm working right now, I'm probably interacting with about a dozen people in various aspects of the game, whether it's art or coding or how to get stuff into that cutscene. Or so it's a bunch of different people I'm working with. I think when you're working on a film or TV show, you probably have maybe three or four primary contacts,
Mhm.
and it's over kind of a shorter period of time than say 2 years of your life.
Mhm.
So the and also with games too, as a composer and sound designer, I'm probably working on three or four projects at the same time. Right as of today I'll be working on two projects, but I'm actually working on a total of four, maybe five now. Uh, so over the course of a given week, I'm probably working on four or five different projects.
Wow. How do you kind of separate your creativity when you're working on multiple projects at once?
Excellent question. It can be really difficult hopping from one project to another, and I do enjoy it when I can have a whole day on one single project. If I have to bounce between three projects in the same day, my brain starts to get tired very quickly, and I'm like, oh, where was I and how was I? So there's a lot of sort of bookkeeping involved. Bookkeeping may not be the right word. Like a lot of to-do lists help me through. Oh yeah, what was I supposed to do on that other project, and going
Mhm.
back and forth. But going into a mode can sometimes be difficult when I'm going from like a, a tension filled superhero game to like a VR, like, oh, I have to put on the headset and now I'm playing with these little creatures or whatever. It definitely can be a big swing, especially if I'm doing two music in the same day. If I'm doing, you know, period music in the morning and then a different one in the afternoon. I don't enjoy that a lot, but it's
Mhm.
part of the territory. It's just like what we have to deal with in terms of the work that we have coming in the door. And ultimately I enjoy the camaraderie and the team stuff, and I don't want to disappoint them. So you kind of live with it. It's like, all right, well, I'm going to do kids music in the morning and I'm going to do serious music in the afternoon. Fine. Like, we'll figure it out.
It just kind of forces you to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have anything that is coming out sooner that you want to talk about that you're working on at all? Or if not, it's okay.
Probably not. I think that
Okay.
most of the stuff I'm NDA'd to, so I can't talk about it
Mm,
very much.
okay.
And also, I'm kind of a subcontractor now. So again, my name's down on the front door, and I'm not
Right.
necessarily allowed to talk about it because I'm NDA'd on those projects.
Okay. No worries. Maybe I can ask, at what point did you start teaching? Because you were my professor at Berkeley. So,
So I first came to Berkeley as a student back in the late 1980s, and then I returned to Berkeley in 2008 as a uh, to create the curriculum for their game development program, their game scoring program. As part of the film scoring program, wanted to hire someone at the time who knew a lot about game scoring, and ultimately they picked me. And the question might be, you know well, Michael, why did you go into teaching? And at the time I owned a you know a, a reasonable sized business that did music, and we did everything from music for sports to music for games to some commercial and branding work. It was a lot of different things. And one of the things that I took on sort of in the early 2000s was a person from the New School in New York City asked me to teach a sound design class. And I was like, oh, yeah, Monday nights from like 7 to 9 or something, or 6 to 9. I was like, all right, yeah, that sounds fun. Let me try that. And I enjoyed teaching. I thought it was kind of interesting, and it was fun to uh, talk with students and collaborate on projects. And so I always thought, oh yeah, maybe when I'm 60, I'll go into teaching. And I wasn't 60 when I returned to Berkeley to teach. I was about 40 at the time. And I got offered that job. And I think I was at a crossroads with composing and music and my career at the time that sort of led me to teaching. One of the things about writing music for a living is that you lose touch with uh, you kind of lose touch with music, not in the sense of the broader picture of like being in touch with what's on the radio and things like that, but because music is your day job, the last thing that you want to do when you go home is to listen to more music. So some of the things that as a teenager I can honestly say that music saved my life, right? Music was the thing that transformed who I was. It was the thing that kind of held me together. And when I couldn't rely on music to uh, like fill a part in my soul, uh, I started to disconnect and be very unhappy with writing music for myself. And it was a nice transition for me to go teach and fall in love with music all over again, so that it became personal to me as opposed to my work life, right?
mm,
Work life took over my entire musical soul in a way. And so I felt like when I went to teach, it allowed me to connect with music in a way that I hadn't honestly felt for a decade. It really, because it wasn't about writing music for someone else anymore. On the side, I could, my day job was teaching. On the side, music could fill that void that I had missed out on for so many years. So I was able to take piano lessons again. I was able to kind of write music for me as opposed to writing music for other people. And it relieved that kind of burden and made music much more personal again for me. And that's ultimately the reason why I sort of transitioned from business into teaching. And it really helped save my soul again. And it really allowed me to connect with music in a way that I hadn't been able to in terms of time.
Mm.
And so I think that your relationship as a professional, your relationship to music will change from that first time where you like when you were maybe a teenager or a young person and you heard that music and it transformed your life. uh, I was able to reconnect with that part of my soul that I was unable to do through my business, through my music business. And so I am much more balanced now. When I left teaching in late 2019 and moved to Los Angeles in 2020, there are various factors of why I'm here and why I left teaching. But one of them was that my wife and partner, uh, she works in film, and we always kind of knew that Boston was a little bit temporary, although we spent over a decade there, and I enjoyed teaching very much. And Berkeley's a really special place. I sort of realized that that chapter in our lives was kind of over, and we moved out to LA, where my wife works in film and television, and that we made that trade off, and that was kind of the end or the decline of my teaching. And now I'm just kind of back in music. But because I was able to find my love of music again, I'm not, and I don't have my name at the, I'm not responsible for employees anymore. I'm not responsible for bringing in the kind of income that a business would require. uh, my love of music has continued to sort of flourish and grow, and I really enjoy that.
That's beautiful. I love that you were able to actually take the space you needed to find it again and kind of reinvigorate that for yourself.
It was a turbulent time. It wasn't easy for me to kind of just say, "Oh, by the way, yeah, let's move to from New York to Boston." It had implications for my wife and my son, and it was a turbulent time, but it
Hmm.
ultimately proved to be the right path and right career for path for me to take at that time.
Was part of you feeling like you were giving up by taking a teaching job? Was it that, or I guess you also had a very successful business, so you were kind of leaving that behind too, or
I think there is, if I was a student, that's kind of how I would think of it. I would kind
yeah.
of think of it as, oh yeah, they were giving up on that part of their career and now they've retired into teaching and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And I think, you know, um, it's I will never be on the level of say uh, a super like I'll never be the next Yoko Shimomura as an example, who's incredibly famous for what she does on in video games and is incredible at just a credible composer and things like that. I may never reach that because my skill set is just super broad. If all I did with music, maybe I could kind of, reach that level. But I think we all make choices in our lives that what's the next right step for me? And so in terms of me reconnect with music, that was probably more important than being more famous or making more money or doing these other things. But music is always at the core. Very few people reach that sort of elite level, but many people can make a living writing music, doing sound design for whatever medium they're into: film, games, corporate commercials, audiobooks, podcasting, whatever it is. There's lots of work out there that allow us to kind of uh, express our creativity in these various ways. Um, and I one of the exercises that I would do in my class is let's name off as many film composers as we can, right? And frequently in a class of 25, we couldn't get to 25, right? We couldn't get to the 25 composers that we all kind of knew living. I think if
Mhm.
we went into sort of dead film composers. We get to that, we get to
Yeah.
50 maybe. But that exercise made it very real to the students how many people kind of make it to that elite level. That
Mhm.
there are lots of working composers out there doing many different things, but that elite level that Hans Zimmer lives on and John Williams lives on, and things like that. There's a handful of people kind of at that level, but there's many working composers that can afford to make house payments and send their kids to college and things like that. So I think that a lot of it is figuring out what works for you at that time in your life. And you may be lucky enough to have all the right connections to work on the next Dune or the next Kingdom Hearts or the next Last of Us or whatever it is. But sometimes those stars don't align. But you still can find lots of ways, fulfilling ways to enrich your career as a composer and have fun with it and have enjoyable relationships with developers or directors in films that can be enormously satisfying as opposed to the quote fame part of it, which only
Mhm.
a few elite people are going to kind of reach that level.
Yeah, it's a very, very eloquent way of putting it, I think. Also, I did not mean any offense by saying you were giving up because I didn't think you were giving up. I wasn't sure if you felt that way in yourself by making that choice, um, because people do often see it like that, you know? But it's not teaching, especially in an art, is never a negative thing. I don't think teaching is a negative thing in any way. So,
Yeah, teaching. There are good teachers and there are bad teachers, right?
yeah.
Um, I I hope that I was a good teacher to my students along the way. Some students went on to have successful careers, and other people decided that music was not for them, and they did kind of other things. I think I'm clearly aware of from both perspectives in terms of how we view and see teachers. And some of the best teachers I had were not the most successful career it had the most successful careers. Sometimes they
Mhm.
align together and sometimes they don't. I hope that I was a good teacher, but I don't know. It's uh life is an adventure, and I think that I certainly found a lot of joy in teaching and growing young composers into the industry and relating how and I think that if you're successful all along the way, you can't go into teaching and then have all the mistakes that you made along the way. It's like sometimes the
Mm.
mistakes are better learning experiences for students than when you did something right or the best game that you did or that you got this award and things like that. It's more about what can I teach them not to do when they go out in the industry, and what can I tell them to focus on to better, ultimately, I think for most composers, it should be about how do you pay next month's rent and how do you have a fulfilling life as opposed to, the next Oscar or the GDC awards or whatever it is. So it's a balancing act, and sometimes luck has a lot to do with whether you make it to that elite league or not. And I don't regret not being at that elite league because I have plenty of people that love the work that I do, trust me, and care about me like family. And to me, those are far greater gifts than having an award that sits on a shelf or
Mhm.
being at that elite level. But if that's what you need, then pursue it. I think that everyone has a different road, and it's important to kind of focus on your road. And if that's what speaks to you, go for it and do your best and find fulfillment in what you can uh, uh, gather out of life.
I love that. I think as well that success doesn't mean the same thing for two different people. I think that we look at famous people or we look at successful people as people who make a lot of money or are famous or work on these different things, but that's definitely not reality for most people.
Right.
So success isn't going to be defined by those things. So you kind of have to figure out what success does mean for you in order to have happiness
Yeah,
in life.
perspective changes a lot from the shift from being a student to being a professional where the money's on the line and going out and getting the work's on the line. And and I don't think students necessarily recognize that it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to kind of just earn money making music to pay your rent is really hard. And so I don't make judgment on people as best I can because they're on whatever path they're on, and although as a student I did the same thing. I was like, oh, aren't they trading? You know, did they not make it, and that's why they're in teaching? Maybe, and that's okay too. Maybe they're great teachers, and they wouldn't be great teachers if they hadn't made it in the real world. And real world is such a awful. It's like
Yeah.
that's not it at all. It's like all of
Yeah.
this. It's evolving, and we're all in this kind of uh, living organism together. And it's as a young person, you kind of view things more as black and white success versus failure. And life is a series of successes and failures. It's not about one or the other. And there's a whole lot of gray in between. And uh, it's important to find joy and happiness and cultivate that in the people in your family. And you know that's that brings me much more joy than working on an elite or a game that made a lot of money or those kinds of things. It's more, yeah, I want to find joy in my day-to-day interactions and what I create than focusing too much on the dollar figures or the awards that I've garnered over the course of my career.
I think that's very valuable to hear from someone like you in the music industry. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
Um, I don't have any more questions. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
No, I think that's it.
Cool.
Great questions. Thank you for taking me to a place that I don't normally go, and I enjoyed it a lot.
No worries. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.